The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. At the request of the ranking member, we'll begin the hearing. He will join us momentarily. The committee is meeting today to receive testimony on securing our nation's chemical facilities, building on the progress of the CFATS program. Since 2007, the Department of Homeland Security has administered a regulatory program that covers security measures at high-risk chemical facilities to protect against the threat of terrorist attack. Through CFATS, DHS works with chemical facility owners and operators to make sure they have safeguards in place to prevent a bad actor from gaining access to dangerous chemicals stored on site. In the past, this program has enjoyed broad bipartisan support on and off the Hill. Officials in the Bush administration, including former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff, were among the first to call for a federal rule to secure chemical facilities. And officials from the Trump administration among the most recent. Last November, DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen wrote to Congress urging us to reauthorize CFATS. We continue to face one of the most serious terrorist threats environments since 9/11. Foreign terrorist organizations are urging recruits to use simple weapons, including toxic chemicals, to target public spaces and events. Clearly, this threat has not abated. Yet the department's authority to carry out CFATS came very close to lapsing last month until this committee that caused this committee to pass a short-term bill extending the program until 2020. For 8 years, CFATS was tied to annual appropriation cycle. Lacking the certainty of a multi-year authorization, DHS struggles to keep staff, develop long-term policies, and work with a regulated community that did not know if the rules would apply the following year. In 2014, Congress worked on a bicameral, bipartisan basis to finally put an end to this pattern by passing a multi-year authorization. I had hoped to work collaboratively in the last Congress, as we did in 2014, to give CFATS a long-term reauthorization. Unfortunately, that did not come to pass, and we once again found ourselves with no alternative but to pass another short-term extension. As chairman, I do not intend to let that happen again. This committee is acting early this Congress to get a reauthorization bill across the finish line. However, I do not plan to let reauthorization become an excuse to water down regulatory requirements or diminish the overall security value of the program. CFATS is already designed to give flexibility and deference to facility owners and operators. The requirements are non-prescriptive, meaning that regulated facilities can choose security measures that work for their unique environment so long as their site security plan generally adheres to a set of risk-based security principles. When DHS inspectors go out and find that a facility's security plan falls short, they work with that facility to address vulnerability. Thanks in part to the leadership of Director Wolf, who is testifying here today, the CFATS program is in place where Congress can build on a foundation that has already been laid. For example, there are currently half as many high-risk facilities in the U.S. as there were in 2007. I would like to understand how DHS is encouraging facilities to voluntarily reduce and remove chemical security risk and how we might put that data to good use. I also see reauthorization as an opportunity to figure out what's working and what's not. That may mean taking another look at how CFAT handle whistleblowers or deciding if expedited approval program is a good use of DHS's limited resources. Finally, there are some areas where the program continues to fall short. 6 years ago, there was a fertilizer plant explosion in West Texas that caused catastrophic damage and took the lives of first responders who had been called to the scene. On the screen above you is a picture of that scene where volunteer firemen went to that location not knowing what they were going to, and they lost their life. So we need to close that loophole because as a volunteer fireman myself, those public-spirited first responders did not know what they were going to until it was too late. So if CFATs had been in place, those individuals probably, given the information available, would not have approached it in the same light. So whatever we need to do to make sure information is being shared, this is a challenge we will address. I look forward to hearing from the panel today about how we might improve CFATs and make sure we give DHS and the regulated community the stability and certainty of a long-term reauthorization program. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry I'm late. Thank you for holding this important hearing. Before I begin, I would like to express my extreme disappointment that the majority staff denied the minority's request for a witness at today's hearing. Under Rule 11 of the Rules of the House, the minorities afforded at least one witness at each committee hearing. If denied a witness, the minority is entitled to a separate, if denied a witness, the minority is entitled to a separate hearing to take testimony from its witnesses. So pursuant to rules of the House, I'm providing the chairman with a letter signed by the Republican members of the committee formally invoking our right to a separate hearing of the full committee to hear from minority witnesses. I ask unanimous consent that a letter be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Okay. The rules require the chairman to schedule a hearing in a reasonable period of time. We request a hearing as soon as possible. CFATS is a critical program aimed at keeping dangerous chemicals out of the hands of terrorists. In the past, Republicans and Democrats have worked together to reauthorize CFATS and make improvements to the program. I hope the tradition of bipartisanship on this issue can continue despite the actions taken by the majority today. CFATS has been a successful program because it gives industry flexibility to secure their facilities with guidance from the Department of Homeland Security based on each facility's unique risks and attributes. Fortunately, we have a solid program that works well as a starting point. Only small tweaks are needed to make an already good program even better. I believe that with bipartisan, bicameral process, we can quickly give stakeholders the certainty they need and move a long-term reauthorization of CFATS to the President's desk. I hope the chairman will join me in providing stability and certainty regarding chemical security and avoid taking actions which would undermine enactment of a bipartisan long-term reauthorization. I look forward to working collaboratively with the majority, the Senate, the stakeholders, and DHS to reauthorize the CFAT program. I also look forward to today's witnesses. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. In response to the ranking member's request, we will do so in writing, but consistent with the rules that we adopted for this committee, similar to the rules we've had before, we offered a government witness to this government panel. And from my understanding, that was not accepted, but you could have had a government witness. And we will respond in writing, but the rules we apply are the same rules that this committee has always operated under. Other members of the committee are reminded that under the committee rules, opening statements may be submitted for the record. I welcome our panel of witnesses. First, I'd like to welcome David Wolf, the Director of the Infrastructure Security Compliance Division at the DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. Mr. Wolf has been CFATS through some of its difficult challenges and helped it mature into an internationally renowned chemical security program. I'm thankful for his leadership on CFATS and look forward to his testimony. Next, I'd like to welcome Mr. Nathan Anderson from the Government Accountability Office, Homeland Security and Justice Team. Mr. Anderson has contributed to GAO's substantial body of work on the CFATS program, including a report GAO issued last July, which I expect will play a major role in informing CFATS reauthorization and provide important context to our conversation today. Without objections, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Wolf.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Rogers, and other members of the committee. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be here today to provide an update on the progress of the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program, or CFATS, the progress that the CFATS program continues to make in fostering security at high-risk chemical facilities across the nation. When I last testified before this committee in 2014, the CFATS program was in a very different place, having faced some significant challenges in its early years, but we had implemented a comprehensive corrective action plan and had made some measurable forward progress. At that time, I emphasized the importance of long-term authorization for this critical national security program, and I'm very grateful for the leadership you and the committee demonstrated in securing the 4-year CFATS authorization that was signed into law in December 2014. And I'm grateful, of course, as well for your role in attaining the 15-month extension of that authorization through April of 2020 that was enacted last month. I'm very appreciative that this committee is holding today's hearing and is again taking a lead role to ensure continuing long-term authorization of CFATS, and I look forward to working with you to continue to enhance and to evolve our program. Now, as I'm sure you'll hear me say once or twice today, the stability that has come along with long-term authorization has driven unprecedented progress as our team has worked with CFATS-covered facilities to make America's high-risk chemical infrastructure a truly hard target, with literally tens of thousands of security measures having been put in place at high-risk chemical facilities across the nation. These facilities have achieved, on average, a 55% increase in their security posture as a direct result of CFATS. The stability afforded by long-term authorization has facilitated our planning and execution of important programmatic improvements, a few of which I'll detail in a moment, while it has also afforded regulated industry stakeholders with the certainty they deserved as they planned for and made significant investments in CFATS-related security measures. Now, I know that as the reauthorization process proceeds, you'll have the opportunity to hear directly from industry and other stakeholders about their experience with CFATS. The gains I've just noted would not have been possible without the commitment and hard work of companies and our various other stakeholders across the nation who have put into place CFATS-focused security measures and in many cases have provided important feedback and ideas that have helped us to improve our processes and our effectiveness as we've evolved and enhanced the program over the past 4 years. So I see many of those stakeholders in the room, and I appreciate their presence here today. I'd also like to acknowledge Nathan Anderson and the important role that GAO has played in reviewing our operations and making many helpful recommendations over the past several years. And of course, I want to acknowledge our hardworking CFATS team, so 250 folks here in Washington and across the nation who have built a truly world-class program and who are laser-focused on securing America's highest-risk chemical infrastructure. So about those programmatic improvements I mentioned, what have we been doing to make CFATS even stronger as we've enjoyed the stability of long-term authorization over the past 4 years? Well, we have improved processes, we've eliminated bottlenecks, and we've seen unprecedented progress in the pace of inspections and in the review and approval of facility site security plans, eliminating a backlog of security plan reviews 6 years ahead of earlier GAO projections. We've developed and launched an improved risk assessment methodology that effectively accounts for all relevant elements of risk, and we've reassessed the level of risk associated with nearly 30,000 facilities across the country. We've implemented the CFATS Personnel Surety Program, affording the highest tiered CFATS-covered facilities the ability to ensure that individuals with access to critical assets have been vetted for terrorist ties. And we have dramatically reduced burden across our stakeholder community, having built and launched a streamlined, more user-friendly suite of online tools through which facilities submit risk assessment surveys, also known as top screens, and develop their site security plans. While the stability afforded by long-term authorization has yielded all of this progress over the past 4 years, we're certainly not done yet. And continued long-term authorization will be absolutely critical to ensuring that we're able to focus on driving even more effective and even more efficient approaches to fostering chemical security across the nation. Now, as we are all too aware, the threat of chemical terrorism remains a real and a very relevant one. Around the globe, our adversaries continue to seek, to acquire, and to use in attacks chemicals of the sort that trigger coverage under CFATS. And the threat stream continues to reflect that chemical facilities themselves remain an attractive target for our adversaries. I can tell you with certainty that the work we are doing in concert with our committed stakeholders across the wide variety of industries and facilities that compose the CFATS-covered universe is making a real difference in protecting the nation. And having had the opportunity to work closely with my counterparts in other nations and to co-chair the G7 Global Partnerships Chemical Security Working Group, I can tell you as well that what we're doing here in the United States through CFATS, the culture of chemical security you have helped us to build with your support for long-term CFATS authorization, is absolutely the envy of the world. With its targeted focus on the highest risk facilities, with its 18 comprehensive risk-based performance standards addressing physical, cyber, and insider threats, and with its non-prescriptive, flexible approach to regulation, CFATS is well suited to enhancing security across the very diverse universe of high-risk chemical facilities. So before I wrap up, I'd like to again thank the committee and your top-notch staff for your leadership on CFATS and on chemical security writ large. We're fond of saying that chemical security is a shared commitment, and not unlike the role that industry and other stakeholders who have embraced and helped us to build this program in so many ways, and the role of our committed and very talented team at DHS, the role of Congress and the role of this committee in shaping and authorizing CFATS for the long term has been hugely important, and I'm looking forward to working further with you as we drive towards reauthorization this year. So thanks again, thank you so much. I look forward to your questions and to the dialogue here today.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. We feel your passion. We now recognize Mr. Anderson to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the committee. Good morning. My testimony today is primarily based on work we've conducted over the past few years. Compared to where our CFATS program stood shortly after its inception, DHS has made substantial progress in a number of areas. But there is room for improvement, particularly in reaching out to first responders. I will speak first to the department's efforts to identify high-risk chemical facilities. Just identifying the universe of facilities that should even be regulated under CFATS has been and may always be a huge challenge. There is no one complete data source of facilities that have chemicals. In 2014, we found that DHS used self-reported and unverified data to determine the risk of facilities holding toxic chemicals that could threaten surrounding communities if released. We recommended that DHS should better verify the accuracy of facility-reported data. DHS implemented this recommendation by revising its methodology so it now calculates the risk of toxic release rather than relying on facilities to do so. We have also reviewed the department's actions to assess regulated facilities' risks, which it does to place chemical facilities into the appropriate risk tier. Several years ago, we found that the department's risk assessment approach did not consider all the elements of risk associated with a terrorist attack involving certain chemicals. It treated every facility as equally vulnerable to a terrorist attack, regardless of location or on-site security. We recommended that DHS enhance its risk assessment approach to incorporate all elements of risk and conduct a peer review after doing so. DHS agreed with both recommendations and has implemented actions to address both of them. For example, DHS worked with Sandia National Lab to develop a model to more comprehensively estimate the consequences of a chemical attack. Our assessment of the department's efforts to review and approve chemical facility security plans also identified challenges that DHS has taken steps to address. DHS is to review security plans and visit facilities to ensure their security measures meet DHS standards. In April 2013, we reported a 7 to 9 year backlog for those reviews and visits. At that time, DHS officials told us they were exploring ways to reprioritize resources and streamline inspection requirements. Recently, DHS reported to Congress that it had eliminated its backlog by realigning resources towards security plan reviews. A key quality assurance function involves actions to ensure compliance. And in 2015, we reported that DHS had conducted compliance inspections at 83 of the roughly 1,700 facilities with approved security plans at that time. We found that nearly half of the inspected facilities were not fully compliant with their approved security plans, and that DHS did not have documented procedures for managing facilities compliance. We recommended that DHS document procedures for managing compliance. As a result, DHS revised CFAT's procedures, which we are currently reviewing to determine if they sufficiently document the processes being used to track non-compliant facilities and ensure facilities implement plan measures, as outlined in their security plans. On a positive note, DHS recently told us that they have conducted more than 2,000 compliance inspections. Let me now turn to our most recent work, which addresses DHS's efforts to conduct outreach with stakeholders and first responders. In late 2018, we reported that DHS shared some CFATS information, but first responders and emergency planners may not have all the information they need to minimize the risk of injury or death when responding to incidents at high-risk facilities. We recommended that DHS should, among other things, take actions to improve information sharing with first responders and emergency planners. DHS concurred with this recommendation and reported in September 2018 that they are taking actions to implement it. In closing, our work has found that DHS has made progress in efforts to implement and manage its CFATS program. As CFATS continues to evolve, it will be important to focus on how DHS should measure the security impact of the program, what DHS is doing with all of the information it collects, and how such information is being communicated to the industry, first partners, and others. It will also be important to focus on how the program evolves to face new challenges, such as cybersecurity. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the committee, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
I thank all the witnesses for their testimony. I remind each member that he or she will have 5 minutes to question the panel. I now recognize myself for questions. You saw the picture on the screen earlier about the 12 first responders in West Texas who unfortunately lost their life because they were basically responding to an incident that we could possibly cover under CFATS. Now, the law requires DHS to share such information as is necessary. So, Mr. Anderson, you indicated in your testimony that GAO surveyed first responders and emergency planners last year about whether such critical information is getting shared. Tell us what you found in that survey.
Of course, as part of our work, we looked at 13 or interviewed 13 of 15 local emergency planning committees. These committees cover about 373 high-risk facilities, and 13 of those 15 local emergency planning committees did not have access to the information in CFATS that could potentially be useful to first responders and emergency planners.
So, so the majority of the information that was available just was not being shared.
I think it's a situation of access. DHS has stood up something called the IP Gateway, which is a forum and a vehicle for communicating that kind of information to first responders. I think this is a situation where the first responders either did not have access or were not familiar with how to use the IP Gateway system.
So, Mr. Wolf, can you provide the committee with what do you see as the way forward in this respect?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. So obviously, sharing of information with first responders is of the utmost importance, and it's something that we highly prioritize as a result. Those who may be called upon to respond to incidents at facilities, high-risk facilities or other facilities holding chemicals, need information about those facilities. They need information about the chemical holding so they know what they are walking into when they attempt to save lives and property. So we have redoubled our efforts over the past couple of years to reach to local emergency planning committees. In fact, in 2018, we visited more than 800 of those local emergency planning committees, and we are right now in the midst of a push to reach committees, emergency planning committees associated with the highest population CFATS covered facilities in the various counties, the top 25% of those counties across the country. I think another important thing to remember is that CFATS and our chemical security inspectors across the country promote sharing of information with first responders and do that in a way that connects them directly with facilities. So one of the CFATS risk-based performance standards, RBPS 9, is focused on response, and it requires that every high-risk facility reach out to, make contact with their local first responders. And in many cases, our inspectors, our CFATS team facilitates that contact and that communication. So I think that is another important way in which we are continuing to get the word out, and we're pushing as well information about that IP gateway and signing more and more folks up every day to get access to the portal.
Before I lose my time, you know, there was this requirement that at least 25% that you referenced in your comments would be done by the end of March. Where are you percentage-wise with hitting that target?
We're on track to have that done by the end of March.
And after that, what's the next target?
We will continue, circling back, and we have met with literally thousands of local emergency planning committees, and we're committed to continuing to ride that circuit and to ensure that relevant folks, those who have a need to know information about chemical facilities and chemical holdings, because they may be called to run into those facilities, have the information.
Well, the reason I said that, as I look at the membership of the committee present, a lot of us represent volunteer fire departments in our respective districts. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to push this information out to those departments so that those first responders who are unpaid doing their civic duty would not be put at risk simply because the information that's available is not being shared. Can you give the committee some kind of a guesstimate as to when the process can be completed?
Well, I would say that it's going to be an ongoing, kind of continuing effort. I don't think we will ever stop the outreach, but we will get through those 25% sort of highest density counties in the next month. I would suspect that toward the end of this calendar year, we will have gotten to most of the other LEPCs across the country as well. In many cases, those will be repeat visits.
Thank you. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I gather from your opening statements that CFATS is working well, and that's a fair characterization, Mr. Anderson, from you too. I know you suggested some improvements, but generally it's working well.
The program has progressed over the years and has implemented the majority of GAO's recommendations, so on that score, yes.
You mentioned some recommendations, but I didn't hear anything major that you thought need to be improved. Is that accurate?
We don't have any open recommendations that would direct or be easily directed to, like the safety of a facility itself. Our recommendations that are open and not implemented do deal with whether or not first responders have all the information they need. So in that score, I would consider that a major recommendation, ensuring that the people who respond to these events have the right kind of information. The other recommendation that we have that is currently open is on whether or not the program itself can speak to just how much risk is reduced. As a program evolves, we'd like to see them get to the point where they can say, for X number of dollars invested, here's how much risk has been reduced through this process, through CFATS.
Okay. Mr. Wolf, how would you distinguish CFATS from other security regulatory programs like EPA, OSHA, ATF?
Yeah, so I appreciate the questions. CFATS is a very comprehensive, very security-focused regulatory program. So programs administered by EPA and OSHA focus primarily on safety. Our program, the CFATS program, is a security-focused anti-terrorism program. At its core, our 18 risk-based performance standards addressing physical security, measures to deter, detect, delay terrorist attacks, cybersecurity, insider threat, and the various security-focused threat streams. So I think it is a program that is flexible in its approach, which I think is well suited to the wide diversity of facilities that compose the CFATS regulated universe. It's a program that is very well suited to its task.
Great. Mr. Wolf, do you feel that any CFATS facilities are subject to duplicate security regulations from the jurisdiction of other federal agencies?
So that is a good question. I would say that given the comprehensive nature of the CFATS program, although there are certainly facilities that are touched by a variety of different programs, CFATS is in all cases bringing something additional to the table. And where facilities are perhaps doing things under a different program, if they're putting in place measures, say, to satisfy ATF requirements, but those measures also work to satisfy our DHS CFATS requirements, we absolutely encourage facilities to take credit for and apply those measures within CFATS. So they are not required to duplicate work for CFATS.
Great. Thank you. That's all I have. I'll get back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes other members for questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. In accordance with our committee rules, I will recognize members who were present at the start of the hearing based on seniority on the committee, alternating between majority and minority. Those members coming in later will be recognized in the order of their arrival. Chair now recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this important hearing. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony this morning. I'm glad we touched on the issue of cybersecurity and the facility issues and inspections that are done. So I want to start with Mr. Wolf, if I could. DHS does provide that cyber is one of the 18 performance standards facilities must address. So I want to start out with the question of what cybersecurity guidance does the CFATS program actually to provide to facilities, and what cybersecurity requirements does CFATS make of facilities?
I appreciate that question, and CFATS has been in many ways, I think, ahead of the curve with cybersecurity. So cybersecurity has been an important part of the program since its inception, and I'd say broadly speaking, our focus is on working with facilities to ensure that they have policies and procedures in place, essentially to deter, to detect, and or to delay cyber intrusions. So, you know, we work with them. We have our inspectors trained. Many of our inspectors have been provided advanced cybersecurity training. We have cybersecurity experts in our headquarters who work with facilities as they develop their site security plans, as they think through ways in which they can appropriately restrict access to critical cyber systems, ways in which they can can restrict privileges, ensure that they have appropriate patches in place, that they are, that they are in the best position possible to protect themselves against malware, against ransomware, against the the panoply of cyber threats that are out there.
So can you talk about what are the specific requirements, the cyber requirements that you put on these facilities, and how do you audit those requirements to determine compliance?
Yeah, so we will conduct inspections of facilities across all of their risk-based performance standards, and that includes cyber. So, even before a facility's site security plan is improved, our inspectors will be out helping facilities to develop the policies and procedures they will put in place from a cybersecurity perspective. And when their plans have been approved, we'll be back on a regular cycle of compliance inspection. So, as I mentioned earlier, CFATS is a non-prescriptive, flexible program. So we don't have hard and fast requirements. We have standards that facilities need to meet, and so we will work with facilities to assess what works for a particular facility given its particular operations and the level of integration of its cyber systems with its chemical processes, industrial control systems, et cetera.
So am I to understand that they're setting their own standards?
They are not setting their own standards. They have some flexibility in the types of policies and procedures they can apply to meet the spirit of the cybersecurity standard under CFATS. But no two chemical facilities are alike. So some facilities have cyber systems that are very highly integrated with their industrial control systems, with their chemical processes. Some have no integration whatsoever. So there may be a difference from facility to facility as to what we are going to ask them to have in place to get to a place where we can approve their site security plan.
Okay, I have other questions for you, but I'm going to go to Mr. Anderson, if I could. Mr. Anderson, staying on the topic of cybersecurity, what does GAO evaluate the maturity of the CFAT cybersecurity reviews to be, and do you have suggestions on how those elements of SSPs can be improved?
Thank you. We haven't done a deep dive audit into the cyber realm, but we have touched on it in our recent work, and I think our conclusion is that this may be an area, cyber specifically, where there may be a capability gap. As you may know, GAO produces a high-risk list every 2 years, highlighting certain programs that are vulnerable and at high risk for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. And the cyber area within DHS is one of those, where recently we did raise the question about whether or not they have the right human capital resources to address the cyber threat.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we may want to ask for a specific GAO report on this particular topic with respect to cyber to make sure that there is no gap, if we could, something you'd consider.
Absolutely, and I'll work with Chairman Richmond on making sure we get that request.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our panel today. Mr. Wolf, as the Director of the Infrastructure Security Compliance Division, my question for you is, does every employee at each location have access to all areas of the facility? Or do certain chemical facilities have classified areas? Could you address that for me?
Sure, I appreciate the question, and the short answer is it varies from facility to facility based upon the facility management's facility security officer's assessment as to what makes sense given that facility's particular operation. So you may find a facility with restricted access to certain critical assets. You may have a facility on which all employees have access to all parts of the facility.
Are there any of those scenarios that concern you, or you're familiar with enough to know, as you said, the varying scenarios? Can you deep dive a little bit more for me?
Yeah, so as we work with facilities on an individual basis, which we do as each one develops its comprehensive site security plan, we assess whether it makes sense to have a more restricted area where high-risk chemicals of interest are stored, and whether it makes sense for a particular facility to more fully restrict access to some of its employees, or perhaps to contractors who are coming in and out of the facility.
Yeah. Do you have any concerns of any of the areas that you've overlooked or reviewed?
I would say that we have identified areas of concern as we've worked with facilities to develop their site security plans, and we have been able to address those in the course of that SSP development process. And so I would not approve a plan about which I had concerns.
So let me make sure, is that process in development, or are you saying that's past tense, that those have been resolved, any of those concerns?
Those have been resolved, and the site security plans have been approved.
Some proposed reforms have included requiring all employees at a facility to be notified of the security requirements under CFATS. Do you agree, Mr. Wolf, that having front office staff like an accountant or receptionist know the CFATS plan would add additional security to a chemical facility? Do you agree with that?
So the law requires facilities, to the extent practical, to involve employees who have relevant security expertise in the development of their site security plans. That is, I would say, not likely to include administrative staff.
So going back to my previous question, that wouldn't be a concern for you? That in this case, the accountant or the receptionist know the CFATS plan. You don't think that would help as far as adding additional security to a chemical facility?
I don't imagine that would be particularly helpful.
Okay. Can you describe the additional security risks that may arise from a proposal like this? Can you go a little bit more detail? What would be the issue here?
Yeah, so I think the core of the issue on the sharing of information in the employee context or otherwise is, the importance of ensuring that those folks who have a need to know information, that includes certainly the first responders we discussed earlier, or sort of key facility security focused personnel, have the information that they need to develop plans and to execute security plans. There are processes in place within CFATS, within our risk-based performance standards, that ensure that other employees at facilities, even those who might not be privy to all the details of a security plan or of chemical holdings on the facility, are brought into training, are brought into exercises and drills on incident response, so they have what they need in the event of an incident. But I don't believe that all employees need access to the security features of a
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Torres Small.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson. Mr. Wolf, you spoke about, and I was glad to see that you mentioned DHS outreach to the chemical security community in your prepared statement, and also to see that you talked with over 800 local emergency planning communities based on your questions with Chairman Thompson. I'd like you to speak specifically to outreach to rural communities, and if there are any, I represent the bottom more than one half of New Mexico, so we have a fair number of large communities, large rural communities there. And so I'd like you to speak slightly to if there's any additional outreach you do in these communities where volunteer firefighting departments are in a deeper need.
Absolutely, I appreciate that, and we certainly want to and do get out, to both urban, suburban, and rural communities, and we want to ensure that all who have a need to know information about high-risk chemical facilities, about the chemical holdings, have access to that information. So absolutely, we make an extra effort to get out to rural communities. We have about 150 inspectors across the country. We've actually put in place across the country some new regional offices at which we've put in place regional outreach coordinators, training and exercise coordinators. We have additional firepower at the kind of agency level as well now to help with that outreach. So very much committed to continuing on that path.
Do you have any specific resources tailored towards these rural communities?
I think they are essentially the same resources that we provide to all first responders. So access to the IP gateway tool. We facilitate connections between those first responders and facilities in their areas of responsibility, and ensure that that happens for each and every facility, rural or otherwise.
In the questions that Chairman Thompson asked, I'm glad to hear that DHS is on track for the March 2019 deadline for doing the outreach to the high-risk chemical facilities. Does that information sharing include the specific chemical holdings stored on the sites that the first responders would be responding to?
Yes, it does. So first responders who have a facility in their sort of area of jurisdiction can have access, and we want them to have access to that information.
Right. I want to switch gears just a little bit in terms of it appears that DHS relies heavily on the CFATS facilities to reach out to local emergency responders, and then you have inspectors who come in and confirm that that has occurred. Is that accurate?
In some cases, that's accurate. We will confirm in every case. In some cases, we will actually proactively facilitate the introduction and make sure that that happens, and in many cases participate in those meetings.
And if it turns out that there hasn't been outreach by the facility, would that result in disproving of a facility's site security plan?
It absolutely would. We would not approve a plan where that outreach and connection has not been made.
Great. We also discussed a little bit the outreach that's done to employees of facility plans, so the training and exercise and drills that are done, but also limiting access on a need-to-know basis. I'd like to know a little bit about the input requirement, that there's a requirement to get input from at least one employee, where applicable, or a labor union representative informing the facility plan. Do inspectors confirm that that input requirement has been complied with?
Inspectors will raise that issue during an inspection, and will hear from facilities to what extent they have involved employees and/or as kind of relevant resident bargaining unit members in the process. So, yep, those discussions happen during inspections.
Are inspectors required to speak with those employees or union representatives?
It is not a requirement.
And if it is determined, even if they're not speaking with the employees or labor unions, that there was not an employee or labor union representative consulted, does that result in disapproving of the security plan?
It does not. It does not. So, we sort of leave to the discretion of those who are responsible for security of the facility the extent to which it actually is practical to involve, however many employees in the process.
Even though the CFATS Act requires that input?
Well, the CFATS Act talks about involvement to the extent practical.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the young lady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Mr. Wolf. And the question is, some would say that Department of Homeland Security should mandate that CFATS facilities, regulated facilities, should adopt inherently safer technologies to improve security. And I've been told that these facilities are opposed to that. And so I guess I'm asking if you think that's necessary, and at what rate are the facilities already developing these safer technologies without federal mandates?
Yeah, that is a good question. I appreciate it. And I would say that organically, CFATS has promoted the consideration and implementation of facilities of inherently safer technologies and processes. So, over the course of the program's history, more than 3,000 facilities have either reduced their holdings of high-risk chemicals of interest or eliminated them completely, substituting other less risky chemicals, or have changed their processes and have actually come out of the program, been determined no longer to be high risk. And to my mind, that is a success. That is a win for the program without really the need for an inherently safer technology mandate.
And I have another question for either one of you, and that is, how do you work? I heard earlier how you work with local responders and a gateway program that they look at. I don't know if that's online or what it was, but how do you work with the states and local agencies? How do you communicate with them? Or does every state have a agency that deals directly with you? How does this work?
Yeah, it varies by state. So, some states have multiple agencies that touch facilities holding chemicals. Some states have one. In some states, it's the state fire marshal. In some states, it's fire marshal plus the State Department of Environmental Quality, the State Railroad Commission, or otherwise. So, on a state-by-state basis, we engage with the relevant agencies. At both state and local levels. We prioritize the sharing of information about the list of facilities we have under our purview, both those that we have tiered as high risk and those that we have determined to be not high risk. And we kind of share lists with those state agencies. We crosswalk those lists. And we strive to identify what we call potential chemical facilities of interest, essentially potential outlier facilities, with an eye toward bringing into the program to ensure that we're getting the relevant reports to run through our risk assessment methodology from facilities that have threshold quantities of chemicals of interest. So that is an area in which we have really stepped up our efforts. In recent years, we've put into place a leader within our organization whose full-time responsibility is to coordinate the outreach that we do for the purpose of bringing into the fold those potential outlier facilities.
And one last question, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we had testimony from some cybersecurity folks from the federal government, and one of the things that was identified as a problem is in cybersecurity, there's these different silos, and they're always working on cybersecurity in just that one area and don't really share information. Do you see that as a problem in this sector as well? Because what they were trying to say is usually attackers, hackers, or foreign governments will not only attack one area, but they'll try to attack all of the areas.
Yeah, no, I think that is absolutely a concern, and it's something that the design of CFATS guards very much against. So we have 18 risk-based performance standards that facilities work with us to, as they work with us, they put into place security measures focused not only on physical security, but also on cybersecurity, on insider threat, on the wide variety of kind of threat vectors that exist. So we believe that a high-risk chemical facility that has an approved site security plan and is implementing that site security plan has hardened itself very effectively against multifaceted attacks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the young lady from Michigan, Ms. Sloskin.
Good morning, Lord, not good evening. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate you guys doing this. I'm from Michigan, and we have a large number of these facilities, including 2 in my district, and then just outside my district in Detroit, we had a big chemical fire in years past. So this one's really of interest to my community. I guess my first question, Mr. Wolf, is just on accountability. So how would a member of Congress know after March whether the facilities in his or her district have communicated effectively with local law enforcement, that there's a shared understanding of kind of the risks? Like, how would I know that after March?
Talking about the communication with
Yeah,
the
just
first
making sure.
responders.
Yeah, because I think we had this Detroit fire years ago, but my understanding is we did not have full awareness by the first responders, and we didn't lose anyone, but it certainly was a potential risk. So how would I feel comfort that my local responders have been informed with what they need?
Yeah. So I think I can tell you with confidence that all facilities within the CFATS program, all facilities covered by CFATS will have made connections with their relevant local first responders. It is a requirement of the program. It is the focus of one of our risk-based performance standards, number 9 of 18. It is something that we verify and facilitate. So you can rest assured that that is happening across the 3,300 highest risk chemical facilities and their relevant first responders across the country.
And then are you the senior accountable official if for some reason that didn't happen, right? Of course, I want that all to happen and I want them to check the box. But if for some reason that hasn't happened as it should, are you the senior accountable official for making sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Call me.
Okay, great. And then on cyber, similarly, so again, a congresswoman was mentioning this. So if we started to see trends in, these hacktivists or cyber threats against chemical facilities, would you know about it? If we started to see a systematic attempt either in one state or in a series of states to go after these facilities, is there a reporting mechanism? Are people telling you about the threats that they see? Are you capturing the trends?
Yeah, so we have within our broader organization a cybersecurity division and a national cybersecurity and communications integration center that is focused on threats nationally, that is crunching all of the intelligence, the threat streams, and that is communicating with us. So we are in the mix to get that information, and we're certainly on a daily basis focused on kind of the continuing cyber and other threat streams that concern our facilities.
And then I'm a former CIA officer, and so I get a lot of, I guess they call them complaints from people back home, generally about the lack of information sharing between sort of folks in Washington seeing maybe some of the top secret or secret level information on threats related to cyber, and then what actually distills down. It's a consummate, complaint that I hear. So what is your responsibility to go the other direction and inform facilities if you're seeing things that raise your eyebrows? What is your mandate to do that?
Yeah, it's something that we take very, very seriously, and as the situation might warrant, we have mechanisms in place to reach to facilities and talk to them about ways in which they can harden potentially even further against specific threats. In fact, CFATS program accounts for that. Part of our a couple of our risk-based performance standards are focused on specific threats and elevated threats. And we require facilities to put into their site security plans measures that they would increase in the event we reach out to them and tell them that there is a specific or a more generalized elevated threat that they need to concern themselves with.
And lastly, so again, are you the senior accountable official if for some reason there was a threat against a specific facility or a bunch of facilities in one state and that information didn't get to the facility so they could protect themselves? That is under your mandate?
For CFATS facilities,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, but you raised two good questions. One is, Mr. Wolf, can you provide the committee with how many actions you've brought on facilities inspected that have been found in non-compliance?
Sure, and I guess it's kind of a two-part answer because of the way the CFATS program and our enforcement processes work. Of course, we strive to work with facilities to bring them into a compliance, and by and large, facilities have done a good job and are in compliance with their plans. In upwards of 80 cases, we have had to resort to our enforcement authorities and to issue an administrative order that, per the law, gives facilities a certain amount of time to get their act together and alleviate whatever the issue might be. We've gotten to the point with 5 facilities where we have had to issue a civil monetary penalty, and that has proven in those cases to be the additional impetus facilities needed to come into compliance.
So everybody's in compliance?
Everybody is currently in compliance. We have, it's a dynamic population, right? So facilities are in different stages of perhaps working on their site security plans, getting them to approval. But facilities against which we have enforced and issued civil penalties have come into compliance.
The last question is, those 2 facilities in Ms. Sloskin's district, is there a directory that she can go to, or is there a way that she can get with you and you can say these 2 facilities are compliant?
Yes, absolutely. If there's CFATS facilities, we're glad to sit down and talk through, what exists in
That was really what she was trying to get to.
Pardon me? Yeah.
That was what she was trying to get to.
Yeah, we're glad to get you that information and talk through those
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here and giving your testimony. I think we've made some important strides in streamlining this program, and it's an important program for my constituents in Houston. We have a lot of these facilities, of course, and look forward to giving a long-term extension to this program so that we can have some certainty for the industry and for the American people. Director Wolf, I want to quickly, I know you answered something about inherently safer technologies a minute ago. I just want to get a sense from you. If we were to mandate inherently safer technologies, how feasible would that really be for you to regulate?
I think that would be a pretty tough nut to crack from a pure regulatory standpoint.
Okay. You can expand on that a little bit if you'd like.
Yeah, no, so what CFATS, I think CFATS by its nature promotes the consideration of inherently safer technologies and the implementation of inherently safer technologies.
There's incentives based on the tiering system to have safer
exactly. So facilities make risk-based decisions to change their processes, to change their chemical holdings, maybe to substitute safer chemicals. But I would say, we at DHS are focused on security. Mm-hmm. I think it would be difficult for us to regulate in the area of what is safer or not.
For Director Anderson, has the GAO assessed how much implementing new standards on inherently safer technologies would cost?
We have not looked at that question specifically. Just to expand upon what Director Wolf was saying, the waterfront of types of facilities is highly variable. You have huge petrochemical facilities and then very, very small mom and shop places that are in rural areas. So mandating a specific technology solution may encounter challenges. I think one of the things we've routinely heard in our conversations with industry is about the flexibility of the program and the implementation of the 18 risk-based performance standards. That is what I can speak to. To answer your question directly, we have not looked at the technology piece.
Director Wolf, back to you. Should the risk-based performance standards be modified to reflect the evolving threat from drones or other unmanned aerial vehicles?
Yeah, so the drones question is an important one for sure, and it is a continually evolving sort of threat vector. I think as they stand, the risk-based performance standards account for, and we certainly engage with facilities on the reporting of significant incidents. And we do take in decent number of reports associated with overflight or flights nearby high-risk chemical facilities of unmanned aircraft systems. So I think we have the tools in place from an incident reporting standpoint Our counterparts at the Federal Aviation Administration, I know, are working toward a broader framework, and we are working with
Right.
them on that for critical infrastructure.
Because it's prohibited under federal law to interfere with the operation of a drone right now. So is that part of the conversation? I mean, to allow essentially facilities to defend themselves?
Yeah.
Is that conversation
I think that is
ongoing?
probably a part of the broader conversation for sure. It's an issue that that we at the department are looking at, not just from a chemical facility angle, but across all critical infrastructure sectors.
Okay. And I want to encourage all of us to focus on these new problems with drones as they become more prevalent. Last question I have for, and either one of you can, I think, take this. Is there any discussion about the level of scrutiny placed on the Tier 4 operators, and whether that's necessary, whether that really needs to be as stringent as it is, given the low level of danger from Tier 4 chemical facilities? Is that in discussion at all? What kind of feedback are you getting from the industry on this?
So I think there is pretty broad consensus that tier 4 facilities, Tier 3 facilities as well, which make up the majority of our covered chemical facilities, are high-risk facilities. They are still among the less than 10% of facilities that we've determined to be at high risk of terrorist attack or exploitation. We do have the tiering system in place, so we do apply kind of different standards to the lower tiered but still high risk facilities, and it seems to be an approach and a framework that continues to work well.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Orlando, Florida, Ms. Nimmons.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of our witnesses for joining us today. Mr. Wolf, my questions are for you. When DHS is considering whether a facility is high risk, do you include in that methodology or whatever process you use, would you factor in if the facility would be located to a elementary school, for example, or a nursing home or a hospital?
Yeah, so we factor in, it's a good question. We tier for a couple of major different threat streams, one of which focused on theft and diversion of chemicals, the other of which is focused on facilities where there could be a release into a surrounding community. And in those cases of release, we absolutely factor in the surrounding population. And one of the things we were able to make some significant headway on as we kind of basked in the stability that was afforded by long-term authorization was a complete retooling of our risk assessment methodology. So we're now more accurately able to model those surrounding populations and tier more accurately.
Also, studies show that chemical facilities tend to be concentrated in low-income and minority communities. In determining facility risk, does DHS consider whether a facility is in close proximity to other chemical facilities that could exacerbate the impact of an attack on an already vulnerable population?
We certainly consider what is in the surrounding area by way of population as we do our tiering.
And so when you consider the proximity to those populations, those low-income, already very vulnerable areas, what do you factor into? What is it exactly that you are considering or looking at?
Well, we are considering where the population is located in proximity to a facility, and we are kind of modeling, were there to be an incident that caused a release of chemicals, what part of that population would be impacted, and what number of fatalities could potentially occur as we're thinking about the tiering.
Okay, so when you say where the population is located, what exactly does that mean? Could you help me with that?
It means like how many people are located either during the day or at night in their homes and their businesses and in the schools, and how close they are to the facility, and then we look at what type of chemical we're talking about, what quantities of chemicals we're talking about, what the prospect is for release of those chemicals, what quantity could be released, and then there's sort of a plume modeling effort designed to get us to a place where we can kind of model what the consequences would be of a release of chemicals caused by a terrorist.
Okay, and finally, what are you doing to make sure security measures aren't interfering with precautions taken in anticipation of extreme weather or natural disasters? As the chairman indicated, I come from Florida, so what are you doing to make sure there are no conflicts there as you are implementing your security measures? Or at least that you're working together to make sure there are no conflicts?
Yeah, we strive to, and we do, in fact, work in close cooperation with agencies that are focused on safety, that are focused on response to natural disasters. So that includes continuing, as we continue to implement the provisions of an executive order from 2014 that followed the West Texas incident, to work closely to coordinate with EPA, with OSHA, with ATF, and to harmonize to the extent absolutely possible our respective programs. So and to communicate as frequently and effectively as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, Ms. Wolf, for you. So I understand that there are some facilities that are exempted by statute and some that are included. Do you have any thoughts for us on, these facilities I'm worried about that are exempted, and I'm concerned that these facilities that I'm doing, I don't really see why I'm doing that. So, we write the laws with the best of intent, but not necessarily the implementation is the best, and so you're implementing. So what do you see in terms of what should be in the mix and what isn't in the mix?
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
So there are a number of exemptions, of exclusions from the authority. So, broadly, those exclusions apply to facilities that are covered by other security-focused programs. So nuclear facilities covered by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, facilities owned by the Department of Defense, and a handful of others. It also includes an exemption for water and wastewater facilities. I think that, dozen years into implementation of the program, pretty opportune time to kind of take a look at where we are with the exclusions and maybe to study what might make sense going forward with respect to facilities that are excluded from the program. And we're open as well to talking about, about what facilities are included. As I mentioned earlier, I think the comprehensive nature of CFATS makes it very much value added across the entire universe of 3,300 plus facilities that are currently covered as high risk, and I think it's an important program. So I would say there are not facilities at which I'm saying, why are we doing this at all? We're adding value across the board.
And then sort of building on that conflicts discussion, are you finding yourselves duplicating effort with other agencies, where the person on the ground is saying, wow, you're telling me to do it this way, but I've got this other agency telling me to do it another way? Are you finding conflict where, or maybe even at the statutory level, where one law says this and another law says that? Are you seeing conflict there that needs to be clarified?
I don't think we're seeing conflict. I think we are seeing instances in which what is needed to, rare instances, and what's needed to require, what's needed to meet our standards, meet the intent and spirit of the 18 CFATS risk-based performance standards, is above and beyond what might be required by other programs. So I don't view that as a conflict. I view that as a facility that's been assessed to be at high risk of terrorist attack or exploitation, having to have in place security measures beyond those that might be required or that might be needed by other programs at facilities that aren't high-risk CFATS facilities.
So are you saying you don't see conflict? I mean, you're not running into other agencies and doing what you're doing?
Well, we are certainly covering facilities that are covered by other agencies and their programs. No question about that. I'd say almost every facility we regulate is visited as well by, EPA and/or OSHA, in some cases by Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and by state regulators. But I think CFATS is unique, and it's an extraordinarily comprehensive program that's targeted at the highest risk facilities that are at the highest risk of terrorist attack or exploitation. So there's some overlap, absolutely, in the universes of facilities that we cover as compared to other facilities. That's among the reasons we prioritize working closely both at the national and regional levels with other regulatory agencies.
Mr. Chairman, actually, one final question. How are you handling changes? I mean, when a facility wants to change something, add a new cracker or whatever it may be, is what you're doing getting in the way of that, or is security's just for the whole structure? Doesn't matter if they're subtracting or adding people, services, plant on the ground?
Yeah, unless they are changing their holdings of high-risk chemicals of interest, it should not have an impact. And we're always willing and able to work with facilities as they're thinking about design changes to their processes, to talk them through what impact it might have and options they might have if there is going to be a potential impact under CFATS.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Barragan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by thanking you for making this a priority and for pushing this and having this hearing. When I saw the photo before we started of the explosion in West Texas, it reminded me very much of a facility that it's of great concern in my congressional district. Now, I represent the Port of Los Angeles, and it's a huge economic engine. It touches every congressional district. And should there be an incident there, certainly an explosion like that, it would be devastating to the economy and really to the surrounding areas. And Mr. Wolf, I know you and I had a chance briefly to speak before the hearing started. I wanted to make sure to get over here to follow up. I want to talk a little bit about this facility that is of great concern in my district. As you're aware of it, it is, I call them the LPG storage tanks. They store large amounts of butane and some propane. Now, these are tanks that are right next to a park where children play, within a very close radius of schools where children go to school, and not very far at all from residential neighborhoods and the Port of Los Angeles. And I understand that you've been out to the facility. Is that correct, Mr. Wolf?
If we're talking about the same facility, then yes, I have.
Yeah, and is this facility part of the CFAST program?
So the facility I've visited is part of the program.
Yeah, and do you know if anyone at DHS has assessed the devastating impacts that would occur should there be a leak or an explosion to that facility?
So that is exactly what CFATS is focused on. So, in determining the high-risk status of that facility, we absolutely would have modeled the potential effects of a release caused by terrorist act on the surrounding population, absolutely.
And so one of the questions I often get from constituents will ask questions like, how high risk is it? Is that information public that you might be able to share with us, what the possible result would be if there was an explosion there and the risk level?
Well, portions of our risk-tiering methodology are classified. Mm-hmm. It's certainly a discussion we could have.
Okay. One group, a consulting group that has done a study on it concludes that the devastation from a blast could stretch as far as 6.8 miles from the facility, and that's within the realm of not just residential homes, but the Port of Los Angeles. And again, when I see the photo of what happened in Texas, I noticed there wasn't too many residential around there. I didn't even see anything around that area. And so it's critically important for me that we reauthorize the program, but that we're also making sure that there is ongoing inspections, because I think I read in our report that there had been lapses in safety regulations and things like that. Now, my understanding is because of CFAT's early instability, DHS did not begin carrying out compliance inspections for several years, with the bulk of inspections conducted after 2015. However, since that time, compliance inspections have spiked to over 3,500, and now the question is whether inspectors are being pressured to rush through inspections to get numbers up. Mr. Wolf, how much time do inspectors have to carry out inspections, and how can we be sure that these inspections are not merely paperwork exercise or a rubber stamp?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and inspectors are absolutely not pressured to move through inspections quickly. We do have timeframes in place for the submission of reports. I want to say generally about 2 weeks to get a report done, but if an inspector for whatever reason needs additional time, needs to spend an extra day at a facility or make a return visit to a facility, absolutely is something that we make sure can happen under our program. And, you know, I would say as well, with regard to the facility and potential impacts, I'm glad to have additional discussions about that specific facility, but that, you know, those are exactly the sorts of impacts that CFATS is designed to address. It's exactly the reason that that high-risk facilities are in the CFATS program and have to put into place security measures focused on 18 comprehensive risk-based performance standards and submit to inspections. So absolutely glad to have that.
Well, thank you, and I will certainly follow up with you to have that conversation. I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolf, Mr. Anderson, thank you both for appearing today. I represent South Louisiana. The chemical industry is vital to Louisiana's economy. In Louisiana, it's a $50.5 billion industry, provides over 25,000 direct jobs and an additional 83,000 supporting jobs. In my district alone, this industry generates nearly $60 million in federal tax revenue and employs nearly 7,000 direct employees. These are families that I work for. Statewide, Louisiana ships $7.9 billion in chemical-related products to customers worldwide. Needless to say, ensuring these facilities are secure is vital to my state and district, and by extension, the entire country. Mr. Wolf, based on your testimony, the CFATS program is effective, and its success has positioned the U.S. as a world leader in chemical facility security. As with any government program, I understand there's always room for improvement. I'm certainly willing to work with my colleagues, and I thank the chairman for his leadership and the ranking member as well. I'm willing to work with my colleagues in his body to address how we can improve CFATS and provide a long-term authorization for this important program. Long-term authorization is a significant quest in my mind. Mr. Wolf, given the success of the program in its current state, do you believe it'd be in the best interest of our national security to approve a clean, long-term reauthorization of CFATS and then address any needed changes as issues arise in a bipartisan manner through this body and committee?
I would say that absolutely a long-term authorization for CFATS is key to our ability to continue to focus on chemical security, and it was the foundation for the improvements we were able to make over the last 4 years. I think the foundation of the program is a very strong one. The program is effective and successful.
Thank you, sir. And reflective of your answer regarding protecting the people's treasure, which we're responsible for in this body, do you believe that increased certainty of a long-term or permanent reauthorization would allow government and industry to work more uniformly to develop better practices improving efficiency of the program and thus maintaining the people's investment?
Yeah, no question about it. So the chemical industry, companies across the country have made significant investments, have made capital investments in CFATS-focused security measures. They continue to deserve to know that the program is here for the long haul.
Mr. Anderson, do you concur with that assessment, sir?
GAO doesn't take a position on that, but we would note that,
You work very closely with CFAS, so do you not, sir?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You work very closely with CFAS, and you recognize that long-term stability encourages efficiency in any program, do you not?
Long-term stability absolutely increases certainty in budgets, and periodic reauthorization also provides a good catalyst for oversight, which is the role we fill.
Thank you, sir. But oversight is an ongoing endeavor, is it not? And legislation can be changed as needed to a long-term program, long-term authorization.
True.
Yes, sir. Mr. Wolf, last question. Would political infighting in Congress over minor changes, again, in a bipartisan manner, we're willing to work together, but would political infighting in Congress over minor changes to the currently effective CFAS program while it remains in limbo under short-term authorization be a disservice to our nation's mission to prevent terror attacks?
We are absolutely better positioned to secure America's highest-risk chemical infrastructure with a long-term authorization. No question about it.
I thank you for your answer. Mr. Chairman, I apologize that I have not been able to attend the entire hearing. You know that happens sometimes, but I respect you, sir, and the ranking member, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rose.
Chair, it's Staten Island. Thank you, Chair.
At some point, I'll get it right.
Mr. Wolf, thank you again for being here. Thank you for your service to this country. Let's talk about fusion centers. What has been the role of fusion centers throughout the coordination process? Has this been an institutionalized role? Have they been your direct point of contact? I understand you could reply to that question by saying they've been great, and that's it. Yeah. But I actually want to know what their role has been as mandated by the department, and if there has been a variable role across states, and how we can use this as a point of improving the role of fusion centers as the lead in terms of coordinating issues such as this between the federal government, states, localities, and the private sector.
No, I appreciate that question, and I do think there probably is more that we can do on a national basis. So fusion centers have been an important focal point for us in coordinating, in connecting the CFATS program with state and local law enforcement and first responders. So it's a note, in some cases we have had chemical security inspectors sit at fusion centers, and certainly on the other side of our house, the voluntary side of their house, our protective security advisors are very much looped in, tied to the fusion centers across the country. But I think it's important for us to continue to think about ways we can even further harness across the country.
So I take it then this has been ad hoc, though?
It has sort of varied across the various jurisdictions, absolutely.
So what has been the best example of a fusion center taking the lead? You don't have to name the state, but I just want to know what the model looked like where that fusion center took the lead here.
Yeah, so I think the model looks like a chemical security inspector or a local supervisory inspector or chief of regulatory compliance being well connected with a fusion center and being plugged in by virtue of that fusion center connection with law enforcement and first responders across a given either metropolitan area or state, and pushing tools like the infrastructure protection gateway through which first responders and law enforcement can have access to CFAT's information about high-risk facilities in their jurisdictions. So that's what I think the optimal model is.
That's the optimal best model. What has been the worst case?
I don't know that I have I guess worst case are any situations in which those relationships haven't been built, and I'm not going to say that has happened, but it's a discussion I'm certainly
Theoretically.
glad to continue having. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, in terms of the voluntary participation of the private sector, it seems as if this is actually a great case in which we have been very successful in that regard. What type of lessons learned can we draw out of this to transfer to issues of cybersecurity, general counterterrorism, where we have to involve the private sector, but we're often struggling to get them to come forward? What type of lessons learned can we glean from this?
So, I mean, in this case, we do have a regulatory framework. So there's an obligation for facilities and companies that operate facilities that have threshold quantities of chemicals of interest in our regulation to report information to us, and if they're assessed as high risk, to be part of the program to develop site security plans and be subjected to inspections. But I would say that on a purely voluntary basis, the chemical industry writ large, and that cuts across a variety of critical infrastructure sectors, has been fully committed and bought in to this program and has helped us to drive forward key improvements to the program. So one of the ways that happens is through something we call the Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council framework. So we bring together sector councils of chemical industry, or as the case may be, oil and natural gas industry folks, to talk about ways in which we can continue to enhance our respective critical infrastructure protection and/or chemical security efforts. And I do think that is a good model, and it's one that the department is also using on the cybersecurity front and across other.
So then I take it that the best model in this case was that this was mandatory with private sector involvement. That was the pathway to success then.
The regulatory framework, I think, has helped for sure.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, gentleman from Staten Island. Now recognize gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be back in the old committee room. It looks kind of nice. Just let me say at the outset, you and I, Mr. Chairman, I think enjoyed a very bipartisan relationship. We got along most of the time, and that's how I think this committee should operate. It came to my attention that the minority, in this case our side of the aisle, was not entitled to call a witness at this hearing, and I believe that both the House and committee rules do provide for the minority to be able to call a witness at the hearing, and I hope that we can adhere to that in the future moving forward. Having said that, I commend both of you and the ranking member, for this hearing. I tried to get this thing long-term extension, and we had resistance in the Senate. The best we could get was a 15-month extension. When I talk to chemical facilities in the private sector, they need that kind of certainty. They don't really want to be regulated, but if they are, and they prefer CFATs over other regulatory entities, and they prefer DHS, how important, I guess, Mr. Wolf, I mean, I know how important it is, and I applaud, again, the chairman and ranking member for trying to get a long-term extension. I hope Senator Johnson and his committee will take this up as a long-term extension rather than a short-term, because the private sector needs that kind of certainty, in my judgment. Can you explain to me how important that is?
Yeah, I think the importance cannot be overstated. And I know we've personally visited CFAT's covered facilities that have put in place security measures, and they need the certainty that comes along with knowing that the program is not going to go away, that if they're going to make capital investments in addressing the 18 CFATS risk-based performance standards, putting in place security measures that sometimes require on industry budget cycles, 2, 3, 4-year capital planning. They need to know that the program will be around in 3, 4, 5 years. So long-term authorization is hugely important, not only for industry, but for our ability in the government to plan for and execute the program.
That's a great point. Not only from the private sector, any businessman's going to need more long-term certainty for sure, but the government to be able to implement this effectively. And I think the GAO point probably points that out as an issue. Is that right, sir? Is that
While we at GAO don't take a formal position on reauthorization, we do note the benefits that can accrue, and to add to the list that you both have talked about, it helps the DHS to retain top talent when there is a longer-term reauthorization period and there's that kind of certainty. At the same time, I would simply note, though, that in the past, reauthorization has been an excellent catalyst for program improvement. So that's something that should be noted.
Thank you. The report itself, though, I found some parts troubling. That was identifying high-risk facilities, not fully utilizing threat information, and ensuring compliance. Director Wolf, what have you done to address those concerns? And can you also touch on your outreach efforts to the private sector and the chemical facilities?
Absolutely. So I think I think you're referring to our risk tiering methodology and the extent to which, in the past, we focused largely on the consequences of a potential terrorist attack, less so on vulnerability and threat. And actually, one of the things that the long-term authorization, the 4-year authorization we attained in 2014 enabled us to do was to completely retool that risk tiering methodology so that we are now, as fully as possible, accounting for all relevant elements of risk to include not only consequences and vulnerability, but threat as well. So, that was a huge outgrowth of long-term authorization. And outreach, we continue very much to prioritize outreach, to continue to prioritize working with the various industries that are part of the CFATS covered universe of chemical facilities. One of the things we prioritize, within that area is getting the word out about the program. So we work through national industry associations, we work through local chambers of commerce to ensure that we are communicating as widely, as broadly as possible the basics of the CFATS program, so the facilities that are using chemicals, that are storing chemicals, have the awareness they need to be able to meet their obligations to report to us information about their holdings.
If I can just conclude, GAO plays an important role. We make these kind of requests not to be adversarial and provide gotcha moments, but rather working together to improve government operations. And I'm glad to see that you're adhering to these recommendations to improve your operations. And with that,
very
I'll
helpful.
back.
Thank you very much. In order to make sure the record's complete, let me assure the former chairman that the rules we're operating under are the same set of rules. Both of these are government witnesses. We offered the minority a government witness. They chose not to provide a government witness. So that's really the only reason you don't have a witness. We now recognize the gentlelady from North Chicago, Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for organizing this hearing on DHS's Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards Program and for your leadership in extending this important program. Securing our chemical facilities is vital to our national security and to ensure that our communities remain safe. And I consider it really important to have a robust security plan in place for high-risk facilities. And I'm pleased that DHS can effectively reduce the risk for potential targeting by bad actors. And so my questions are for Mr. Wolf. Sir, as we look to reauthorize the program, there's interest in DHS developing voluntary best practices informed by lessons learned for facilities who may want to lower their risk and possibly their regulatory burden. Is that something that you think that facilities would find useful?
I think it is. As I mentioned earlier in these proceedings, over the course of the program's existence, more than 3,000 facilities have either reduced their holdings of high-risk chemicals, have eliminated them, have substituted safer chemicals, or have changed their processes such that they are no longer considered high risk and are not covered by the program's requirements. So, we have gathered information as these facilities have come out of the program. We've kind of categorized the what, the reduction, the elimination, the change in process, the change in sort of delivery or other procedures. We would certainly be open to discussing additional authority to enable us to further mine the how. And to put us in a position to share that information on a voluntary basis with other facilities, keeping in mind that CFATS is focused, I think appropriately as a risk-based program, and it's targeted at America's highest risk facilities. Mm-hmm. So those facilities at the highest risk of terrorist attack or exploitation. That's less than 10% of the facilities that submit top screens for risk assessment by us. So the additional 30,000 facilities that aren't covered by CFATS could certainly benefit from the lessons that have been derived from the practices that have been used at facilities that have lowered their risk. Absolutely.
Thank you. And so DHS has said that CFATS has encouraged many facilities, as you said, to voluntarily eliminate, reduce, or modify their holdings of certain chemicals of interest in order to reduce the number of high-risk facilities throughout the country. So does DHS, in fact, capture the data on how facilities are reducing the risk? And if so, how can DHS use that data to help other facilities?
Yeah, I think, we have captured what facilities have done, whether they've reduced, whether they've eliminated, whether they've changed a process. But I think there is more that we can do to kind of mine those practices, mine those approaches, and share them more broadly.
Okay, thank you. Now, we've seen a rise in cyber attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure, often carried out by foreign governments, criminal organizations, or terrorist groups. And obviously, the chemical sector is among the most frequent targets. So what type of cybersecurity measures are CFATS facilities required to adopt?
That's a good question, and cybersecurity is an important part of the CFATS program, and our inspectors and other personnel are trained specifically in carrying out the cyber piece of the CFATS inspections. They work with facilities as they develop their site security plans and as they put in place policies and procedures that are designed to protect their cyber systems, to detect cyber attacks, and to address cyber attacks as they might occur. CFATS is a non-prescriptive program. We can't require any specific measures, but we can require a cyber security posture that is appropriate to the facility's level of cyber integration. Facilities vary in the level to which cyber systems impact their chemical processes, their industrial control systems, or for that matter, their physical security systems. So, different measures might be appropriate depending upon that level of integration of the cyber system. So, we work with facilities on an individual basis as they tailor cybersecurity postures that are appropriate to their operations.
So how much cybersecurity training do the inspectors then receive, the CFATS inspectors?
So all inspectors receive a kind of base level of training on cybersecurity, and for that matter, on the other risk-based performance standards. We have a more advanced cybersecurity training that we have run probably about half of our inspectors through, so that's an additional week or two of advanced cyber training, and they are then capable of working with the facilities with a little, somewhat more integration of their cyber systems with chemical processes. And for those facilities that have the highest level of integration, we have we have folks who focus on nothing but cybersecurity at our headquarters. So cyber experts who actually have eyes on every facility's site security plan and who are available to work with inspectors as they work with facilities that have that sort of highest degree of cyber complexity.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wolf and Mr. Anderson, for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good question. Now, I recognize the gentleman from Houston, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for appearing as well. And, Mr. Chairman, I want to extend a special expression of appreciation and gratitude to you because the intelligence that has been accorded me indicates that this is the first time since the 113th Congress that we've had a full committee hearing on this CFATS program, and that the program would have expired had you not intervened and enacted a stopgap measure. So I appreciate greatly what you've done because this program is something that is near and dear to a good many Texans because of what happened in the town of West in Texas. We had a number of persons who were first responders, and I'm sure the story's been told, but some things bear repeating. First responders didn't know what they were rushing into. It's a wonderful thing to accord first responders the proper equipment. Equipment is necessary, but they also have to have intelligence. And they rushed in, they were on the site without intelligence. 15 persons lost their lives. So this is important to a good many of us, and especially to some of us who are from Texas. I'd like to start with the CFATS Act of 2014, which requires DHS to create an experimental new program. DHS has performed diligently, and the program has been implemented, and seems that as of June 2018, only 18 facilities have taken advantage of this program. And my query is, does it make good sense to keep a program that appeals to 18 facilities? I'm sure that there are some other projects that merit our attention. There are some other goals that we should review in the area of cybersecurity, first responder outreach, and DHS probably has a lot of energy that it has put into this that may have been used otherwise. So quickly, if you would, please, give me some sense of why a program that has accommodated 18 facilities at some great expense should be maintained.
Yeah, I think it is, appreciate the remarks, and that is a fair question. And you're referring to the expedited approval program that enables, on, I guess, an expedited basis, the certification of facility security plans where those facilities adhere to a prescriptive list of security measures. And I think it is fair to say, as you noted, that a very small number of facilities have taken advantage, have availed themselves of the program.
If I may just, so that we may understand the size of the language, when you said small, how many could have taken advantage of it, and juxtapose that to the number that have?
Yeah, so it applies to tier 3 and 4 facilities. So that would be 90% of our regulated universe could have taken advantage. So upwards of 2,500 facilities could have.
And of the 2,500, 18 thereabout.
18 have.
Yes.
And
continue, please.
I think some of that owes itself to the fact that most facilities were well through the process of developing their site security plans through the normal process at the time the expedited approval program was rolled out, though we certainly did our best to publicize its availability. And the fact that most facilities appreciate the contact that they're able to have with inspectors throughout the normal process of developing their site security plan. It tends to improve those plans. Although we've had a few additional facilities since the retiering of facilities occurred within the last couple of years that have availed themselves of the program, the overall number is very small. And the fact of the matter is that our online system through which facilities develop their SSPs is now significantly more streamlined, significantly more user-friendly, certainly less incentive to use this other program.
I don't mean to be rude,
No worries.
and unrefined, but I have to ask because I have another question. Is it time to review this program so that we can ascertain whether or not it's something that we should continue with?
I would say yes, certainly time to take a hard look at it.
Okay. I'm going to leave it at that because I have another question. This relates to hexavalent chloride, or chromium, also known as chromium-6, which is quite prevalent around the country and is also a carcinogen. We've had a scare in my hometown of Houston, Texas, and we've got news reporters who've been looking into chromium-6, and EPA has not provided us with the proper guidelines that we've been waiting on for some time. That doesn't mean that we won't get them. But OSHA not only regulates workplaces that use it, but also has referred to it as the most toxic form of chromium, the most toxic form of chromium. And my question is this something that you should give some additional attention to?
It is something that we will certainly look at. Offhand, I am not certain that it is one of the 322 chemicals of interest that trigger coverage under CFATS, but we'll absolutely take a look.
I would greatly appreciate it. And Mr. Chairman, I greatly appreciate the time you've extended, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. If you'll provide Mr. Green, Mr. Wolf with whatever information you have on that, I'm certain, based on Mr. Wolf's comment, he will give you whatever information in return.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I shall do so.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kansas City, Mr. Cleaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for calling this hearing because this is something that I'm very much concerned about. And at our hearing yesterday, I raised similar issues. Because the EPA no longer updates its list of the locations of these facilities, chemical facilities, it's difficult for me to just pinpoint exactly where they are. Now, they have a map, and you can look at the map and kind of get an idea. I'm from Missouri, and so I'm concerned about what the map suggests, which is the rural parts of Missouri. And if you put a comma there for a moment, one of the things that I'm concerned about, and it's been driving me crazy since the days that I was mayor of Kansas City, and it is that for the most part, the federal government ignores the middle of the country as it relates to the possibility of terrorist attacks. And so we lean toward the East Coast, the West Coast, North Coast. And I remind people that it was shortly after Easter, 1996, I think it was, when the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, not too far from Kansas City, was the first major terrorist attack. I can't remember now, it's just under 200 people killed, about half of them little children at a preschool inside the federal building. I have a little 3-year-old grandson who's at a federal daycare center right now. And we just can't seem to get the kind of attention to deal with these issues. And now that there's no update, we don't know. I'll also remind everyone, remind you, and maybe everyone on the committee, that it was ammonium nitrate used by Timothy McVeigh. Ammonium nitrate is fertilizer. I represent a rural area. Everybody uses fertilizer to survive. We have 85,000 jobs in Missouri related to agriculture. We export about $14 billion a year that support those jobs, and many of those are in my district, soybeans and corn. I can't tell you how, and so you know there are facilities all over, and a terrorist with an IQ above room temperature can figure out the most vulnerable places in our country and the places that create the least amount of risk to them. And it's frankly a part of the district I represent. I'm open for you to tell me how we can correct this by next Thursday. Or Wednesday, whatever.
I appreciate all that. I'll take the first crack, and absolutely agree that the terrorist threat is not a bicoastal threat. It is an all of America threat. And for our part, we work closely with fertilizer retailers, with fertilizer manufacturers, many of whom are part of the CFATS program and have put into place comprehensive security measures designed to address the CFATS risk-based performance standards. Our broader organization has placed a regional office in Kansas City to focus on some of the Midwestern states. There's one in Chicago as well. So very focused on working with retailers of fertilizer, with manufacturers of fertilizer, as with all other companies and entities that hold high-risk chemicals and that are covered under CFATS.
The facility is open in Kansas City?
Pardon me? There is a regional office in Kansas City, so our chief of regulatory compliance sits in Kansas City.
How many people are there? I'm just curious, because I wasn't even aware of it.
There are probably 20 folks across the infrastructure protection enterprise in that regional office, and there are protective security advisors and our chemical security inspectors in every state in the region.
I will get in touch with them quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. This is a major issue in my community, so thank you very much for this hearing.
Absolutely. A couple takeaways. Mr. Wolf, I think based on what I heard, I think it would help us if you could provide us with a master list of the facilities that have been regulated. I think that would help a lot. I heard questions from several members, and we can just kind of share that information. So the other has to do with the data of the inspections that you make. Do you collect that data?
Oh, absolutely. We take in, our inspectors produce a report of each and every inspection, and that runs through our compliance branch here in.
So who do you share that data with? Just internally?
It's for our internal use for making decisions about approving site security plans and for, as necessary, engaging in enforcement activities. But some of that data is the type of data, some of the data on the chemical holdings and specifics of the facility is the sort of information that we share with first responders, law enforcement, and others in the local community who have a need to know that information.
Okay. Mr. Anderson, have you all looked at any of that data collection and sharing?
Well, we've certainly looked at both aspects. The data collection piece and the recommendation that we made in that report has been implemented by DHS. So from our view, in terms of the data on assessing risk, for example, DHS has effectively implemented our recommendations. The information sharing point, though, that is still open, and I think that that is a valid point of emphasis from our standpoint, the information sharing with first responders so that there's full visibility over what those threats may be if there is an incident.
Well, and I think that's what Mr. Cleaver and Ms. Sloskin and Underwood, Rose, a number of members are interested in whether or not what we collect through our CFATS process is actually pushed out to the, especially first responders or communities that are at risk, just given the location of many of those facilities. So I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Pursuant to the committee rules 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Hearing no further business, the committee stands adjourned. So